Hello, folks. We're down the line from Cape Cod tonight with political analyst, author, and historian Dr. James D. Boys. I'm Michael L. Roberts. This is the American Chronicle. Welcome all to episode 17 of the American Chronicle, an episode in which we examine the legendary journalist Bob Woodward's new book entitled Rage, regarding his candid interviews with the sitting president. We examine Donald Trump's performance at the ABC Town Hall, hosted by George Stephanopoulos for undecided voters, and we look at the history, meaning, and purpose of the Electoral College and its potential impact on the 2020 presidential election. I began then by asking James about the Woodward book.
So there really is only one book in town this week, and it is this book, Rage, the latest publication by Bob Woodward. This is only the latest book that Woodward has produced upon a series of American presidents, dating all the way back to his groundbreaking work with Carl Bernstein in All the President's Men, which of course helped lead to the downfall of President Richard Nixon in the early 1970s. When you consider the fact that now for some 50 years, Bob Woodward has been chronicling American presidents and gaining the most remarkable access to and insight to administrations. It really is a remarkable track record and a unique feat of journalism, frankly, which is unrepeated in American history, and one would imagine will be unrepeated moving into the future, covering such a wide range of American presidents, both Democrat and Republican, and being, frankly, unsparing in his treatment of presidents from either party, be they, again, Democrat or Republican. What is of note, it must be said, with this publication is that rather than taking a rather critical but subjective view, Bob Woodward has chosen on this occasion to cross the line in the view of many people and to say quite categorically that he believes that Donald Trump clearly is the wrong man for the job at this time. And that, of course, is causing some controversy, shall we say, here in the United States.
The question beggars belief to an extent, but I'll ask it anyway. After Trump already engaged with Woodward in a previous incarnation of writing and otherwise, what would possibly bring Donald Trump to the doorstep and the tape machine of Bob Woodward again at this crucial run up to the election time?
Well, it's been suggested and stated quite bluntly that at some point in your presidency, you will be approached by Bob Woodward, and you have an option as president. You can either play ball or not. And whether you play ball or not, the book will be written. Woodward will somehow gain access, whether you like it or not, and the book will be published. So you have two options: play ball, don't play ball. Earlier in his presidency, as you allude to, Bob Woodward approached Donald Trump and asked for access, and that was denied. The president refused to play ball with Bob Woodward's first book, which was entitled Fear, that came out to great acclaim several years ago. This was an approach which had been taken by other presidents. If I'm not mistaken, Bill Clinton decided not to grant an interview for Woodward's first book on the Clinton presidency entitled The Agenda. That didn't work out quite very well because, of course, all that happened was Woodward went around the president and interviewed many other members of his administration and got access to paperwork, et cetera, et cetera. So clearly, Donald Trump realized that, well, if you don't play ball with Woodward, you have no way of controlling the narrative. And if there's one thing we do know about Donald Trump, whether one likes him or not, he is someone who very much prides himself on believing that he can control the narrative if he is engaging with individuals. Now, whether that is true or not is frankly very debatable. But what you can clearly see here in the narrative which has emerged from Woodward in terms of the creation of this book is that Donald Trump has gone out of his way to make himself available to Bob Woodward through a series of interviews lasting many, many hours, giving Donald Trump giving Woodward a private number that he could basically be reached at any time, and engaging in a series of recordings stretching some 10 hours or so, which Woodward has recorded and has made access to the media, which make for remarkable listening. It's worth considering, of course, that here we are, Bob Woodward, producing a book on another American president who's been impeached, and there are tapes. Does that sound familiar at all? This is eerily present of course, what happened with Richard Nixon some 50 years ago.
Walking straight into your method and madness scenario, yes. Yeah.
Very much so. And this idea that, I've said it about other politicians in the past, if you give them enough rope, if you give them enough access to airtimes, they will talk themselves into trouble. I've long believed that this is what will lead to the downfall of AOC out of New York, for example. And here we are now with Donald Trump. And I'm sure many of our listeners will have heard some of the excerpts, read some of the transcripts. Woodward has been, as always, quite frankly, very forthcoming with regard to his own self-promotion for this book. It is the #1 bestseller here in the United States, just 2 days after its initial publication. He's even been generous enough, if you can make this out, to produce signed copies,
of course,
of his text.
How else?
To get access to his written work. He is a fabulous self-promoter. And frankly, his work is always worth reading because he's notoriously bipartisan in terms of his criticism and access. This time, it will no doubt be Republicans and Trump acolytes who are appalled by his work. Likewise, we've seen in the past his work on Obama and Bill Clinton has been equally caustic, I think. There is much to make in his work, and it is no doubt going to be probably the best-selling political biography of the year, I imagine.
I feel like we've covered many books during the Trump presidency, from Fire and Fury all the way through to this, that have that sense of a bestseller. The Fire and Fury, as I recall, was a sort of a starter out of the gate that didn't necessarily live up to its excitement. Obviously, Woodward comes with a far more secure ethos and otherwise. Let's drill down a little bit into some of the perceived bombshells within this particular Woodward book, and then the sort of Republican or indeed Fox News reaction that is capable of brushing them aside as comparatively insignificant and within a matter of hours already yesterday's news, please.
There are several bombshells within Bob Woodward's latest book on the Trump presidency. Because of the evolving nature of the coronavirus, let's start there. There has been several leaks to this effect already, so forgive me if I'm repeating stuff which is now almost yesterday's news, which, by the way, is the exact critique of this, which people like Fox News are already coming up with. But of course, one of the main headlines out of this text is the fact that Donald Trump is on tape basically admitting that he downplayed the severity of the coronavirus when he was in full possession of the facts to know that that was simply not the case. Now, this is significant because, of course, the United States has a pretty awful track record in terms of dealing with this. The question is, why is that? Well, in our previous series of the American Chronicle, we talked about the great challenges when you have a federal system of government and the difficulty, arguably, that the federal government has in imposing state-by-state mandates with regard to, say, for example, mask wearing. Now, let's be honest about it. If an American president wants to do something, he'll find a way to do it. But what you've seen come out of the text, out of the transcripts from this, is Donald Trump very categorically admitting that he downplayed the severity of this, knowing full well that this was going to be a deadly scenario. From a British point of view, this gets even more interesting because what he's trying to do is to compare himself with
the Churchillian calm. Yes,
exactly. With Winston S. Churchill, the greatest Briton of all time, as not my statement necessarily, although who am I to disagree with that? But of course, a poll of polls at the beginning of the 20th century revealed Churchill the greatest Briton. Donald Trump has said that what he has done by downplaying the coronavirus was basically exactly what Churchill did with the Nazis and the Blitz, suggesting that Churchill used to go up onto rooftops during the Blitz and give speeches, basically saying, it'll be okay. There's nothing to worry about here. Go home. Well, of course, that is simply not true. And again, it is just another case of Donald Trump simply being fast and loose with, in this case, historical analogy. Winston Churchill certainly was renowned for standing on the rooftop of Whitehall as the East End was bombed in quite a remarkable approach, quite frankly. Whether it was foolhardy or unbelievably brave is very much up to individuals to make their own mind up. But he certainly didn't then stand on that rooftop and give speeches to a collected mass below, telling them there's nothing to see here, don't worry about it. If anything, he was quite blunt in his approach and warning of the dangers to come. And it was his rhetoric, of course, which was so important in stirring up the national spirit, the bulldog spirit, if you will, which proved so important in terms of raising the morale and uniting the country to defeat the enemies at that time, which is something which Donald Trump has singularly failed to do at any point, it must be said, during his presidency to date.
Indeed, yes. Many of Churchill's speeches in that sense, Second World War-wise, were actually, the contrast was they were coming from a defeatist position, almost with a sort of last stand psychology, which, as you say, did then invigorate the bulldog spirit, but were very much in the moment far from a sort of everything will be all right as such. It behoves me to ask you, as ever, because we find ourselves doing this every time there's a development in any way, shape, or form here, the impact at this present moment and on the build-up to the presidential election in November, the impact of Woodward's book, of this psychology surrounding the coronavirus, Trump saying he protected everything and calmed the nation, as you analyze there, and the figures saying something very different. What impact, if any, besides for Woodward himself in this moment, does this book have?
Well, as you rightly allude to, here we are again talking about another book on this president. For a president who clearly doesn't read very much, he sure has generated an awful lot of interest within the publication world, and made a lot of money for a select number of authors. The challenge of this is this, however. Whilst nobody is doubting Bob Woodward's integrity or journalistic capacity or even his penmanship here, the challenge is who is going to read this who has not yet made their mind up about Donald Trump. The pros and the cons of Donald Trump were arguably baked in some 4 years ago. Everybody made their minds up a long time. It seems incredible, frankly, that anybody has yet to have their minds made up with regards to this president. Is there anybody out there really who is going to suddenly think, oh, it's a new book on the president, I might read it. Oh, I didn't know this about Donald Trump. I was going to vote for him, but now...
Having visited my socially distanced library, I've changed my mind, yes.
Indeed. Now, let's be honest about it. It might well have an impact upon some of the elderly folks in the United States who might feel that they were naturally inclined to vote Republican, come what may.
Right.
But perhaps because of the revelations about Donald Trump and his deliberate decision to downplay this virus, which will have undoubtedly led to, in their mind, deaths, potentially of people that they know of.
Indeed.
That might well be a game changer. Who knows, frankly? Something else that's worth pointing out is this. One of the great issues that we're facing at the moment is to do with mail-in ballots. Will this have an impact upon people who are getting their ballots now ahead of the election and will vote early? Will this book come out at the exact moment that people are starting to vote by mail? Will it tip that part of the electorate which is planning ahead, which is planning to vote, or are those people going to vote Democrat anyway, quite frankly? This is the great unknown. And the extent to which one book will make a great difference is very difficult to tell. What might make a difference, of course, is the publicity surrounding the book. I dare say that far more Americans will be aware of the book and will see Woodward on television talking about his book and will be aware of Donald Trump attacking the book than will ever read the book. They will be aware of the headlines, the bullet points that come out of this, and it will doubtless play for several weeks to come. Woodward has hardly been off the air, quite frankly, this last week. Yeah. The various networks are giving him, hours of free air time. He was on Lawrence O'Donnell's show last night for an entire hour on MSNBC. Perhaps doesn't come as a great surprise to Trump's critics. But it is a book which nobody can get away from. It is the main talking point here in Washington and across the nation this week, and will no doubt play into the Sunday talk shows this weekend. And we're only a few days away, weeks away from the presidential debates, and less than sort of 55 odd days away from the election itself. So at this point, quite frankly, there are so many variables that Woodward could very well have an impact upon the outcome of this election.
Speaking of influencing those people potentially on the fence, as it were, in this scenario, Trump did an ABC town hall with George Stephanopoulos this week to a very, very socially distanced, limited room of undecided voters, as it were. I was wondering your thoughts on that process, that performance, and its impact or lack thereof in the election, please.
So this obviously is a remarkable election season where we're seeing two candidates who are basically trying to sort of find their own way through a socially distanced path to the White House. And we're seeing both candidates find their own unique way in their own unique style. Donald Trump, of course, has been widely noted, has his own direct access to Fox News pretty much whenever he wants to, through his connection with Sean Hannity in particular, but also with Fox and Friends, their morning show, which are very receptive to his attempts to call in and to try to drive the narrative. So it's notable that rather than doing a similar show on Fox News, which would have been the obvious location to do this, that Donald Trump chose to do it on ABC, one of the main networks here, a network which is free to air. You don't need a subscription to see it. So it's a great way of getting access to a large swathe of the American electorate. Unfortunately for Donald Trump, the viewing figures for this show were not as one might have expected. You could offer a tip of the hat to Donald Trump for daring to venture into what he would call mainstream media. And let's be honest about it. Again, from a Republican point of view, let's try to be balanced here. Many people might not be aware that George Stephanopoulos, before he became a major anchor on and ABC was Bill Clinton's ridiculously young communications director, so young, in fact, that when he became communications director at the White House, they gave him non-prescription glasses just to make him look older.
Wow.
Viewers of Friends from the early 90s.
Yes. Drop the towel. Yes.
The one with George Stephanopoulos, in which he was suggested that he'd moved across the street from Monica and Friends, etc., etc., etc. He's also the individual who, by the way, was the inspiration for Sam Seaborn on The West Wing, and before that, for Michael J. Fox's character on The American President. So this is someone who's got great cultural resonance, but let's be honest about it, is a Democrat operative, and this is something which has been often leveled against ABC. Why on earth would you bring in someone who is so obviously associated with one particular party? Right. It would be a little bit, frankly, like bringing in Alistair Campbell, Tony Blair's famed spin doctor, to work for, say, for example, ITV, and expecting him to be totally bipartisan. An easy criticism to say, well, he'd obviously be favouring Labour, wouldn't he? Let's move on from that. George Stephanopoulos did not cover himself in glory in this. Many people have suggested that he was far too soft on Donald Trump. He is not someone who is renowned for being a particularly hard-hitting journalist. No. At all, quite frankly. He's been doing this job now for far longer than he ever worked for Bill Clinton, and has really never established himself, I don't think, as the sort of journalist of a generation that perhaps he thought he might be able to when he moved to ABC. In fact, what you're seeing actually is a recognition that the hard-hitting questions came not from Stephanopoulos, but from members of the audience. That's one thing. We've seen that in the past, of course. Back in 1992, George H.W. Bush was undone by a series of questions in a town hall meeting that Bill Clinton just absolutely dominated. Here we are now in 2020, and again, an American president is seen to be struggling to answer questions directly from the American electorate. CNN believed that he made at least 22 directly false statements during that town hall on a variety of issues, which should come as no surprise to anybody. This is the week when Donald Trump has been talking about his plans for the forthcoming presidential debates, and basically saying he has no plans to prepare at all, that he will go in basically cold. He doesn't want to worry about trying to remember a whole host of facts and figures from briefing books, believing that, for example, when Mitt Romney took that approach in 2012, that he was so overwhelmed with facts and figures that he simply couldn't function. Well, whether that was actually true about Romney is debatable, quite frankly. I seem to remember he had a pretty darn good debate performance in the first debate against Obama.
Yes, there was,
It's certainly very true that his approach will be one of bluster and, frankly, not relying upon accurate facts and figures, but basically trying to out-Blarney, I think, Joe Biden when those debates happen in a few short weeks' time.
As is perhaps inevitable, I'm tempted into drawing parallels between how Trump and Biden are acting this time compared to how Trump and Hillary acted 4 years ago. I'm interested on your take as to the parallels that can be drawn in terms of similarities, perhaps the extent to which Biden and Trump have learnt things from 4 years ago that means they're approaching things differently now. And I think something that you and I have covered in the past, the significance of third-party candidates in the mix, very, very prevalent in the 2016 election, and perhaps you could explore and explain to us their significance or lack thereof in this one, please.
Well, you think it would be an all too obvious thing to do, isn't it? The Democrats would look back and say, well, okay, what did we do wrong? There was an election in 2016 that was ours to lose, and by God, did we lose it. How did we do that? Well, the easy narrative is, well, it was because of Hillary, and Hillary wasn't a popular candidate. And if we just put someone like Joe Biden on the ticket, he would have won, and we wouldn't now be talking about the end of the first term of Donald Trump, but the end of Joe Biden's first term and moving into a successful bid for re-election. I think it's far too simplistic. And it's also something which simply isn't being borne out, because one of the understandable criticisms, quite frankly, of Hillary Clinton's campaign in the final stages was the extent to which it was believed to be resting on its laurels, that this, what was known as the blue firewall of states that were given, that always vote Democrat, could be basically forgotten about, and Hillary should start moving into uncharted territory, maybe states that her husband had won, for example, back in 1992, like Arizona, in an attempt to extend her grip on the Electoral College, and also to try and help out candidates for the Senate in an attempt, therefore, to not only win Hillary Clinton the presidency, but also to win the Democrats' control over the House and the Senate, which, of course, would allow far greater leeway for President Hillary Clinton to get her legislative agenda through. The problem with that, of course, is you better damn well make sure that you have got your those states firmed up before you start trying to increase your lead. And of course, this was a mistake that it believed Hillary made some 4 years ago by, it must be said, ignoring the very, very good advice of Bill Clinton, who suggested that, quite frankly, they should be more worried about, dare I say it, a series of states which included Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, which of course proved to be the ultimate Achilles heel in Bobby Mooke's campaign strategy to get his boss, Hillary Clinton, elected president. The tragedy is now that whilst those states were viewed as all too tempting and all too obvious choices for Joe Biden, this sort of folksy, blue-collar, working-class orientated politician to be aiming at, the latest news coming out is the belief that, frankly, he is not going to these places for one reason or another. And we can talk about coronavirus all you like, quite frankly, but he simply does not believe to be focusing upon these states sufficiently, and has instead been believed to be focusing upon Arizona, again, almost making the verbatim mistake that's believed Hillary made some 4 years ago. Another mistake it's believed that was made by Hillary Clinton was with regard to the Hispanic vote. Now, I wrote in my biography of Hillary Clinton entitled Hillary Rising that I thought it might be opportune for her to choose a Hispanic candidate for vice president in an attempt to tap into that vast growing electorate here in the United States, an all too obvious move for the Democratic Party to tap into. Well, here we are now some 4 years later on, and Joe Biden has not chosen a Hispanic candidate for the vice presidency. The Hispanic community is basically saying that they don't believe that they are being courted sufficiently by Joe Biden, believing that they as a community are being left behind in the Black Lives Matter movement. We're not going to touch upon race relations here in this today, but it's worth noting that, this isn't simply a white versus non-white debate in the United States. It is very nuanced, and in many cases, the Hispanic community is not supportive of the Black Lives Matter as you might imagine they might be as another minority group in the United States. And indeed, what you're seeing is elements within the Hispanic community saying, "Oh, we're not being courted by Joe Biden. We will vote for Donald Trump."
That's the demographic aspect there. Let's talk about the third party element in terms of 2016, and I see, for example, Michael Bloomberg investing money again this week in order to influence various aspects. If you could explore that for us, please.
Yeah. So, I dread to think how many thousands of words have been written trying to explain why it is that Donald Trump prevailed in 2016. We've had, offerings from everybody. I've tried to suggest in various talks about why that might be. Hillary Clinton, of course, surprise, surprise, managed to find a way of getting another book deal out of this to try and explain what happened. she lost. There's what happened. Now, why is that? Well, there are so many reasons about why she did lose and why Donald Trump prevailed, that frankly, any one of them could well have been influential. But certainly one of the key reasons that Donald Trump won last time in an election victory, which many people thought was impossible. And indeed, when you look at his path to victory, the needle he had to thread, again, on paper, even now appears impossible. How did he do that? How can it happen again? Well, one of the reasons it happened was because far too much attention in the media and in all analytics, quite frankly, continues to focus upon 2016 as though it was a simple Democrat versus Republican race. And of course it was not. Just as in 2000, when you had a remarkable election victory, in that case for George W. Bush, you had the presence of multiple candidates, third-party candidates, if we can call them that. Jill Stein running for the Green Party, for example, the presence of an independent vote candidate, for example, again, helped split the votes. And whilst in terms of the greater overall electoral vote, the numbers of people voting for them was basically insignificant. In a key number of states where those votes were close, remembering that it is a winner-take-all process here in the United States on a state-by-state basis, the presence of the independence vote, of the Green Party vote in 2016, as well as going back to 2016, again, the presence of people like Ralph Nader, people like Pat Buchanan, made a difference. And it was the difference between those votes in places, again, like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, that made a difference, arguably, between a probably quite healthy Hillary Clinton victory in those states and a very, very narrow election victory in those states for Donald Trump, who, I remind everybody, won those three states by a combined total of less than 70,000 votes. That's less than would fit into Old Trafford, say, for example, on a normal Saturday afternoon in a COVID-free environment. So third-party candidates made a hell of a difference in 2016, and their lack of a presence, frankly, here in 2020, will have an impact upon the election. Now, Michael Bloomberg can spend as much money as he wants trying to support Joe Biden. But the fact that there is not a third party running to potentially split the vote on one side or another, either helping Biden or helping Trump, will make this a much more difficult election, arguably, to try to forecast. Because, of course, attempts to look back at 2016 will be rendered somewhat irrespective because of the lack of third-party candidates running in this election cycle.
Indeed. One of the most common questions for me for people looking for your aforementioned silver lining in the scenario here in terms of a Biden victory over Trump is that concern over the definition and the impact of the Electoral College on this result this time around. Obviously, to a large extent, the nature of social media, the nature of Donald Trump's presidency has brought American politics as far back as 2016 far more into the sort of public mindset than it might previously have been here in the UK. And one of the things that causes great confusion, given the size of Hillary Clinton's popular vote win and otherwise, is the impact of the Electoral College in that situation. So I wondered this evening whether we could close out with an infamous James Boyce summary of the Electoral College and the extent to which it guarantees another Trump victory this November or otherwise, please.
Okay, so an attempt to explain the Electoral College. The Electoral College is confusing to many people. Many people believe the United States, of course, is a democracy. Well, the definition of a democracy is basically rule by the masses. If that was the case, of course, Hillary Clinton would have been president in 2016. Al Gore would have been president in 2000. In both of those elections, the Democratic candidate for president won a plurality of the votes cast across the nation. However, that is not how the United States decides ultimately who its chief executive officer will be. Indeed, for all of us who are looking to stay up late into the night on election night, come early November, we are in many ways wasting our time. Not only, quite frankly, is it possible that the election will not be decided in terms of the vote on the election night here in the United States because of the presence of mail-in votes and the announcement this week, for example, that various states votes will be counted even after the election date, quite frankly, which is going to really infuriate Donald Trump and lead to more questions about the veracity of the vote. But the Electoral College does not meet to decide the election until later in the year. Now, how does the Electoral College work itself? There are 538 electors to the Electoral College. To win the presidency, you need an overriding majority of 270 votes in the Electoral College. As I've told students many, many times, this is about electoral math, and 270 is the great number. How do we get to 270? Well, many people wonder, well, where are these figures? How does this come about? Let's break this down. Rather than thinking about an American election, I want to ask people to think about 50 independent, separate, state-by-state elections, because that is how the presidency is ultimately decided. Each state has a differing number of electors which you will send to the Electoral College. That number is actually very easy to calculate. It is based along these lines. Each state has initially 2 electors because each state has 2 senators in the United States Senate. However, in addition to that, each state will then have a number of electors depending upon how many members it sends to the House of Representatives. And that number is dependent upon population. So very, very small states with a very small population will only have 1 extra delegate. Therefore, the minimum number of electors from any one state will be 3.
Right.
Up to a maximum, which California has, for example. California is the most populous state in the nation, not the largest, of course, geographically. That is actually Alaska. But again, Alaska is a classic example. It's a large state geographically, but a relatively minor state in terms of population. And indeed, Alaska only has 3 electors to the Electoral College because of the population, which I've just explained. California currently has 55 delegates to the Electoral College because it has 53 members of the House of Representatives and a further 2 senators, hence 55. So you need 270 Electoral College votes to win the presidency. Each state is a winner-take-all basis come the election of the president. So if you factor in states like California with 55 Electoral College votes, Texas, 38 Electoral College votes, Florida, 29, New York State, 29, you can start to see, I think, how it's possible to win the presidency with a very small number of states indeed. On the other hand, you could also take an approach, which is if you're a Republican, you're probably going to need to win a whole host of states in the Midwest, where it must be said you have very large states, but with very few people living there. Indeed, there is an entire swathe of states across the Midwest, if you will, where there are a handful of states with only 3, 4, 5 Electoral College delegates there. So it is fair to say, I think, that Republicans need to win more, less densely populated states to win the presidency than the Democrats do in terms of looking how it is that various states vote at this point. This, of course, is why Hillary Clinton lost in 2016. Yes, she won California with 55 Electoral College votes, and won that state by some 2 million votes, it's believed. But she would have been far better off moving some of those 2 million votes across the border to a variety of states, including Arizona, for example, where she would have picked up a whole host of other electoral college votes, which didn't go her way, but went to Donald Trump instead. So it is a straightforward race to a delegate count. Each state has its own numbers, and you see each party, Democrats and Republican, focusing very heavily upon those states that they believe are in their back pocket, and trying to push on into swing states in which the elections are decided. And we saw 4 years ago, for example, how Donald Trump managed to do that by taking what was seen to be pretty solidly blue states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and flipping them. If any one of those states had gone for Hillary Clinton, it would have prevented Donald Trump from becoming president.